my name is Hannah. I am a child sexual abuse survivor, and I am here to share my story. When we speak about, the things that we've been through, they lose power over us, and it's kind of healing and therapeutic, and even listening to other people's stories. So I was born in a small town in Missouri, the oldest of 4 girls. Between the 4 of us, we had 3 different dads, all shared the same mom. When we were born, my mom wasn't really around much. She, I think, had her own experiences that kind of made her not the best mom to us. And so she just kept having kids basically and didn't really stick around to raise us. My grandma ended up being the one to primarily raise us when we were younger, and she's actually blind. One of my earliest memories of abuse actually happened there. I remember sitting outside of that house, and I remember there being like lines with sheets on them. And it was a sunny day, and I was sitting on a man's lap, and I remember him like tickling me, and I was giggling and laughing, and then like he ended up going down my pants, and like he did something that hurt me because I remember jumping and saying ow, and that's all I remember about that. But years later, when I talked to my grandma about it, she actually put a name and face to the memory, which was really bizarre. Apparently she was there. I don't remember her being there, but she said that she heard me and told me to get off of his lap and had me come over there by her. Fast forward to foster care. So the first couple homes that we went to, they split us up. Me and my sister went to a couple different homes, and I remember the first couple were like really good. They were great to us. At some point about a year in, we went to our final foster home, which was a family that was willing to take in all 4 of us. And I remember being told that and being really excited. The family was great. At first, there was a husband, wife, and then the wife had 4 of her own biological children. When we went into this home, I was like 6, and then my youngest sister was 18 months old. So we were all excited. We thought it was going to be great, and it was for a while. And then eventually her oldest son started abusing me as well. He was like a teenager at the time, so I didn't really like look at him as an adult, and it was like really confusing as to like what was happening and how it was happening, because I thought he was like just another kid. A couple instances with him that I remember, we were in the bathroom on the floor, and I remember him like he had me undressed, and then he was undressed, and he like tried to stick his thing in me, but like he didn't really make a huge effort because like it wouldn't go in, and he didn't force it in, and like he just like kind of humped me like we were doing something but we really weren't. And then there was another time that I remember where he took me out to the garage and set me on a truck and pulled it out and told me to suck on it like it was a strawberry ice cream. I remember telling him no, and I didn't do it. I know eventually it got to the point where I would just comply with it, but then I confided in the youngest sibling of the mother of the foster mom, because we were like pretty close. I felt really close to her. She took a liking to me, I took a liking to her, and I guess I told her about what was going on, and somehow it got back to the foster parents. And so I remember them calling me into their room one night and sitting me down and asking me like, did these things happen? And I told them, yeah, it is, and yes, it did. And then they like were like, are you sure? Like, are you just confused? Did you have a dream? Are you like confused with something that happened with your dad? Because my dad actually at that time was incarcerated on child pornography charges, and they knew that. And I will say, like, with my dad, he never like really physically or sexually abused me. He was like kind of around when I was younger, as much as my mom would let him be, because there was just a lot of animosity between like him and my mom. Me and my cousin were over at his trailer, and we were taking a bath, and he like had this camera in this like closet that had like a window type deal that was like vented so you could like see through it, and he had it aimed at us. And I remember like knowing about it, but I didn't really have the guts to say anything, but my cousin said something to him about it. And then there was another time where he had like a bunch of sex toys, and me and my other sister, through him, one of my first memories with her, we're not very close, we really never have been. I've only seen her a few times in my life, but I remember him putting us in a room with them and like setting up a camera, and like us being like really confused. And so that was that. They ended up like badgering me to the point where I was in tears, trying to get me to lie and say that it didn't happen, but I knew that it did happen, and so I was really confused and just hurt. After that, the mom said that she was going to take me to get examined by a specialist to make sure that there was no trauma down there, and like she did that in effort to prove her son's innocence, I guess. And she took me, and there was no like evidence of physical trauma. And so she deemed me a liar. Until this day, she still says that I lied and made all of that up. I guess it was one day that we were having a sleepover because we were in the smaller bedroom, which was intended for my two youngest siblings. And when they would come over, we would sleep. We would make a big pallet on the floor and we'd all sleep together. And on this night, I remember waking up and everything being blurry. Like, growing up and being older and reflecting on this memory, I know that he drugged me. He gave me something, I don't know what or when, but I remember waking up and like trying to sit up and everything being blurry, him being between my legs, my underwear were off, and there was nothing I could do but like go back to sleep. And as all this was happening, my stepdad and I developed a very hostile relationship. I became very like resentful towards him, and I made it very clear that I did not like him. I didn't want anything to do with him. And I'm sure to my mom it seemed like, you know, normal, but like it wasn't normal. And it ended up causing a lot of behavioral issues for me. I would lash out about like nothing. I became a very sexual child. I had to have been like 10, 11. But I remember being in my room and like just crying and feeling so alone and just not wanting to live anymore. And I'm really thankful that at the time, this was in like, I don't know, I'm 28. So this was like years ago, like pre-cell phone, pre-social media. But like I know, had I been exposed to more at that time, I probably would have attempted suicide. And then eventually one night, my mom and my stepdad got in a fight. I don't remember this happening often. I remember it being pretty traumatic. I heard them in their room, and I heard my mom like heard a big bang, and I heard them yelling, and then I heard silence. And so I grabbed a butcher knife and I ran into their room, busted through the door and threw the knife at my stepdad and told him to get away from my mom, at which point he did. And then everyone went about their business. And then like the next day, my mom came and picked me up from school and had her little red car packed to the brim with mostly her stuff. She said, we're moving to Farmington. We're moving back to our hometown. And she's like, we're going to stay with grandma. And then being in that town, a whole other set of like, I don't know, crazy behaviors ensued. When I first moved there, I got a lot of male attention, I guess, that I wasn't really equipped to deal with. And then that led to me losing my virginity at 13. And like looking back on that, like I don't even know if I actually was a virgin or not, because the normal things didn't happen. A lot of different people. I basically became hypersexual. I had a lot of sex with a lot of my friends when I was very young. And that led to me getting pregnant at 15 with a friend. I was a sophomore in high school when I found out. We had a hard go at first because I was 16. And at the time we were still living at my grandma's. And while it was not the Franklin house that I was born into, it was like still not the best, wasn't the cleanest. And I told my mom if she wanted me to have this baby, she would get us in a better living situation because I was not having her grow up the way that I did. And I meant it too. I told her I would put my daughter up for adoption. Like I was desperate to do whatever I had to do to make sure that she had a better start. And I think she knew that I was serious because a couple weeks before my daughter was born, she got an apartment and let me and my boyfriend and my daughter move into it with her. And we stayed there for a couple months. And then eventually the landlord started coming and knocking on the door, asking where the rent money was. We were there for like literally just a couple months. It didn't last long. My mom eventually stopped staying there, and like we didn't really know like where she was or what she was doing. Eventually we learned that she was dating a new guy and was staying out at his house, and I guess stopped paying the rent where we were. Something else important to note is that my mother was a pathological liar. She used to lie all the time about everything, as long as I can remember. Fortunately, my boyfriend turned 18 way before I did, and so we were able to get our own apartment together, and we did that. We used our tax money to move into our first apartment, and then I had also decided that I was going to go get my GED in time to start college with my graduating class, and so I did that as well. I went and got my GED, started college with all my peers, and I went to college for a year. During that time, I met a girl that became like my best friend. A little bit before all of this, me and my boyfriend of like a few years ended up breaking up. I think just like the college life and like a lot of different things. He ended up losing his best friend in a car wreck a couple years before I lost mine, and we ended up separating. So at this point, I'm 18, I have my own apartment, my first apartment by myself with my daughter, And I had my own car. I'd used my student loans from the year prior to get myself a car. My family, we grew up very poor. So the fact that I was able to make these things happen for myself was a victory in itself. So she passed away within a week of losing her. I met the father of my second child, and he was actually an addict, and I met him through a good friend, actually, a female friend that I was really close to. And when we met, he's like 5 years older than me, and he used, and eventually I started using with him. And I remember in the beginning, like, he would do it so much, and I would like sit him down and I'd be like, what, how do you do this? Like, he would smoke it, and I'm like, how do you do this all day every day? We ended up separating. Right after we separated, I found out I was pregnant. And after I found out I was pregnant, he told everyone that it wasn't his kid. He maintained that right up until literally like this week. I finally took him for paternity and child support and everything, and DNA confirmed that it was obviously his kid. But for years, he told everyone that it wasn't his kid. And like, he was really hostile about it. My head's all messed up. I don't want to be pregnant. And I realized then that I was a drug addict because I could not stop using. I used for like the first 4 months of my pregnancy. I used, and I told myself I was going to get an abortion, and I really planned on getting an abortion. So I had to find the money to do it. I had to find transportation to do it. And it was like, if I had one, I didn't have the other. And then next thing I know, I'm 8 months pregnant. And I went and I was honest about my addiction. And the first time I went and saw the doctor for that pregnancy was also the first time that I saw my son. I was like 35 weeks, and they did an ultrasound, and I didn't use again after that, not while I was pregnant with him. So then I had him, and I tried to keep my life together for like the weeks following, but it was really hard. It didn't last long. It wasn't long before I was back out there on the streets doing the same stuff. But I do also want to note that he was born healthy, and he's still healthy. He's thriving by the grace of God. After I had him, I did relapse, and I ended up in jail for some period of time. And while I was in jail, my grandma had lost her apartment, or lost her house. So after I'd lost my apartment, I started staying at my grandma's by default. That's kind of like what my grandma's house was. It was kind of like a revolving door for all her kids and her grandkids too. Like, we would go out and try to do life on our own, and when we failed, we'd move back in with her. But while I was in jail, I guess my grandma had lost her house, because when I got out, I found out that she didn't live there anymore. She had had this house for like years and years. And so I'm like, wait, like, where are my kids if they're not with my grandma? And so I had found out that my kids were staying with my old foster mom. Because again, I mentioned that when I went home to my mom and stepdad, my other siblings didn't. She literally raised them. The two oldest ones, when they were old enough to leave, they left. And then the youngest one, like I said, she was a baby when we moved in there. And so that was her mom, that was her family. And till this day, that's how it is. Like, me and her don't even have a healthy relationship. She's very, my perspective is, I feel like they influenced how she feels about me and who I am, because we've always had a hard time, like, just having any kind of relationship. And she's also convinced that I'm a liar and that I made those things up, like she's told me. Like, in the heat of an argument, she's like, you're a liar. That never happened to you. If it happened to you, it would have happened to me too. She literally said that to me one day, and I'm like, it really was a reality check, because I'm like, no matter what I do or who I am or who I try to be, like, you're always going to have these feelings toward me. So I got out of jail. I moved in with some friends who were using. They were in active addiction. So I used for a while, and then I met this older guy in the same apartment complex as where I was. He worked for someone over there, and he expressed interest in me, and he was a good guy. He wasn't on drugs, and he was quite a bit older, but he was willing to take me out of the living situation I was in and help me get a job and just help me get my life together. And so I took him up on that. And after I moved in with him, I got a couple months clean, and he helped me get a job. He helped me get a car. Like, I thought I was together enough to have my kids. So I went over to where my kids were, and I asked to have them back, and she told me no. And so I called the police, and I had my kids' birth certificates with me also, just in case anything like this happened. And the cops came, and they were just kind of like ignorant towards me. They were like, well, where have you been the last 3 months? Like, And I told them, like, I was in jail, but like I'm doing good now. I'm sober. I have all these things. And I was like, I just want to bring my kids home. They're my kids. And they're like, they wouldn't do it. They did not make her turn my kids over to me. I don't know if they had the ability to or what, but it didn't happen that day. And so I left, and so while I was with this guy, I was like clean for the most part. I really tried to stay clean, but like him and I had our own problems. And so I did use periodically, but I would say that I was definitely like in a better situation. In 2017, I found out that I was pregnant again with a different guy that was someone that I used with. So during one of my instances of like him and I would get in like arguments, like pretty bad arguments, and I would leave for days and, you know, do what I was doing before and then come back. And so that's what happened. I had him in 2018 and breastfed him for a year, and so I stayed clean during that time too. In the midst of this happening, my old foster mom did petition the court for emergency temporary guardianship of my kids, and they gave it to her. So she now has guardianship of my other two, my oldest two, and then I just had another one. When the baby was born, it was very obvious whose son it was. And so the boyfriend that I was with at the time, we just kind of gradually stopped seeing each other. In the beginning of 2019, I met another guy through Facebook dating, and he was in recovery from like and stuff, and I was in recovery from. Then like a few months in, we ended up relapsing together. And this time, so I stopped breastfeeding in February of 2019, and I did great up until that point. I continued using, and then in July of 2019, I had my first and only overdose. I overdosed at my work. It was a hot summer day, and I'd done some like really strong, I think it was, and luckily there was a guy who I worked with that was like, he really like liked me and cared about me. And so he pretty much watched my every move that day. And he's the one who found me and called 911. I was in my car. I guess I went out to my car after I had done the drugs and got in my car, put the keys in the ignition, but never started it. So I was in this hot car with the windows up and it was off. And I woke up in the ambulance and I had a panic attack because when I realized where I was, like, I freaked out, and so they took me to the hospital, and I ended up losing my job over that, obviously. That happened in July. You would think that that would have gotten me clean, but it didn't. I kept using in a way that I thought I had it under control. And then in October, DFS came knocking on my door, and my son was there. I was with this girl that I was using with, and they told me to find someone to take my son so I could go with them to take a drug test. I was honest with the guy about everything. I told him that I had been using, I was having a hard time getting clean, and that I was not going to pass my drug test. And so I took the drug test. I didn't pass it, and they're like, okay, well, we can't let you take your son. If you have family that he can stay with, that's what we will try first, but if not, we're gonna have to put him in the system. And so I was able to convince one of my aunts to care for him while he was in the state's custody. And I remember thinking that that was gonna be like that was it for me. I didn't see any coming back from that. I couldn't believe that I had lost custody of now 3 of my children. And again, I was just embarrassed. I was ashamed, and I really felt like I didn't think I'd come back from it. But in the same week that this happened, I got a Facebook message from a girl that I knew from my area, and she was like, hey, how are you? Like, I heard you're not doing well. Have you considered going to treatment? And like I told her, I said, I'm not doing that. I've done that once before, and I had like state insurance. So the rehab that I went to the first time was really just terrible. And so at first I was completely opposed to the idea. I was like, I have state insurance. I know what kind of facility that will get me access to. I said, I'm not doing that. And she was like, you don't understand. I work at this treatment center. It's amazing. We have scholarships. I can get you in here for free. You don't have to pay a dime. And she sent me the link, and she's like, just look into it. So I did look into it, and I was like, well, this could potentially help me. Like, this is going to do nothing but help me get my child home. So I'll do it. And so I went that weekend and checked myself in, and I stayed there for a month. And I graduated from that treatment center. About a year later, well, exactly a year later to the date, I walked the written service agreement with DFS and got my son home after she gave me custody of my son back, she told me, she gave me her phone number. And she told me that if I ever needed anything, that she would be there just to call her. And I was like, well, someday I plan to, go back to court and try to get my other kids home, so I might take you up on that. And while I was in treatment, I forgot to mention, I met my husband. We got out and eventually decided to, get in a relationship and try to do life together. And we decided we wanted to have a baby. And so I was able to experience my first planned pregnancy. And we got married in November of 2020. And then we bought a house in March of 2021. And then we had our daughter in April of 2021. And then we took the guardians to court for termination of guardianship, and we were granted it about a year later. And so now all of my kids are back in my care. I'm still sober and things are great. So I feel like initially it was like, I'm going to do this for my kids. You have to do this for you. You have to want better for you. I've also had very strong faith. And I fully believe that were it not for that, I wouldn't be here, because after all those years, I always came back to that. And now I'm trying to live the best life I can live and just be the best version of myself. I'm trying to turn my pain into power and just use my life experiences to help people and to raise as good of humans as I can raise. I would say that whatever you're experiencing and however alone you feel, someone somewhere has experienced exactly that, and it doesn't define you. You can let it hurt you, or you can let it help you. You can dwell on it, or you can make something of yourself for it. I feel like there is good that comes out of every bad situation. You've just really got to condition your heart to be able to see it. The first time I was abused, I was about 4. The second time that I was abused, it began when I was about 7 and went on until I was about 12. 7 to about 9, 8 or 9. I was about 8 or 9 when I met my stepdad. There is one more thing. I feel like when you go through something like this, like, your first instinct is to bury it, and that can be very dangerous because then you're faced with fear and shame. But one thing that I've learned is that when you talk about it, when you speak out against it, it is therapeutic. It's very healing. It not only helps you, but it helps people listening. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Share your story.